Namaste. I am Rajneesh Sawant and you're watching Janta Janardhan. Friends, the topic that I have chosen to speak on is global economic status vis-a-vis Covid-19 pandemic. Friends, I have broken this topic into two parts. Viz. The first one deals with impact and the second revival measures to be taken and positives out of this crisis. So friends, let's start with the first part. Friends, India has entered into its 8th lockdown since 1st September 2020. Already COVID-19 crisis has caused an unprecedented collapse in economic activities over the past almost 5 months. According to various surveys, analysis, data, we have seen that COVID-19 is having a day-by-day increasing detrimental impact on global as well as Indian businesses. FICCI said in a statement, the survey clearly highlights that unless a substantive economic package is announced by the government immediately, we could see a permanent impairment of a large section of the industry which may lose the opportunity of coming back to life. Accenture says, outmaneuver uncertainty, navigating the human and business impact of COVID-19. The tagline is, turn massive challenges into meaningful change. It is easier said than done. As India faced a spike in cases of COVID-19, the Indian government wanted to empower its 1.3 billion people with information to reduce their risk of contracting the virus. Accenture and Microsoft worked closely with Digital India Corporation to create MyGov Sathi, a AI powered virtual agent embedded on the government's Self for Society website that provides useful information on the pandemic. The agent provides answers to common questions and delivers fact sheets, information on government initiative, medical advice, and lists of mythbusters. It manages interaction relevant to the user persona without need for human assistance. Friends, let's see what UN has to say. The UN framework for immediate socio-economic response to COVID-19 crisis warns that the COVID-19 pandemic is far more than a health crisis. It is affecting societies and economies at their core. While the impact of the pandemic will vary from country to country, it will most likely increase poverty and inequalities at a global scale, making achievements of SDGs even more urgent. Further, without urgent socio-economic responses, global suffering will escalate, jeopardizing lives and livelihoods for years to come. Friends, let's see what International Monetary Fund has to say. In the latter part of June 2020, it has new predictions suggest a deeper recession and a slower recovery. First, worst recession since the Great Depression in the 1920s. Global output to fall 4.9% this year. And the third, the strength of the recovery is uncertain. The pandemic pushed economies into a great lockdown, which helped contain the virus and save lives, but also triggered the worst recession since the Great Depression. Over 75% of the countries are now reopening at the same time as the pandemic was intensifying in many emerging markets and developing economies. However, in the absence of medical solution, the strength of recovery is highly uncertain and the impact on sectors and countries uneven. In June, WEO forecast a decline of 4.9%, that is 1.9% below April forecast. As well as partial recovery is projected in 2021. These projections imply a cumulative loss to the global economy over 2 years, that is 2020 and 2021, of over $12 trillion from this crisis. Further geopolitical and trade tensions could damage fragile global relationships at a time when the trade is projected to collapse by around 12%. The IMF is further projecting a synchronized deep downturn in 2020 for both advanced economies -8% and emerging market and developing economies at -3, -5 if excluding China. And over 95% countries are projected to have negative per capita income growth in 2020, which is absolutely serious. Countries heavily reliant on contact intensive service sectors like hospitality, travel, and tourism are likely to be deeply impacted for a prolonged period. The labor market has been severely hit and at a record speed, and particularly so for lower income and semi-skilled workers who do not have the option of teleworking. With activity in labor-intensive sectors like construction, tourism, and hospitality are expected to remain subdued, full recovery of labor market may take a while, worsening income inequalities and increasing poverty. The international community must ensure that developing economies can finance critical spending through provision of concession financing, debt relief and grants, and that emerging market and developing countries have access to international liquidity via ensuring financial market stability, central bank swap lines, and deployment of global financial safety net. The advanced economies GDP in 2019 was 1.7%, projected in 2020 is -8%, projected for 2021 is 4.8%. India as an emerging market GDP in 2019 was 4.2%, projected for 2020 is -4.5%, projected for 2021 is 6%. Let's see what the World Bank has to say. According to the World Bank forecast, the global economy will shrink by 5.2% this year. That would represent deepest recession since the Second World War, with the largest fraction of economies experiencing declines in per capita output since 1870. The World Bank says it in its June 20 Global Economic Prospect. The World Bank Group Vice President for Equitable Growth, Finance and Institutions said, "This is deeply sobering outlook, with the crisis likely to leave long-lasting scars and pose major global challenges. Our first order of business is to address the global health and economic emergency. Beyond that, the global community must unite to find ways to rebuild as robust a recovery as possible to prevent more people from falling into poverty and unemployment." Global growth is forecast to rebound to 4.2% in 2021 as advanced economies grow 3.9% and EMDs bounce back by 4.6%. However, the outlook is highly uncertain and downside risks are predominant, including the possibility of more protracted pandemic, financial upheaval, retreat from global trade, and supply linkages. A downside scenario could lead the global economy to shrink by as much as 8% this year, followed by a sluggish recovery in 2021 of just over 1%, with output in EMDs contracting by almost 5% this year. The worst hit would be the euro area output, expected to shrink 9.1% in 2020. The World Bank Prospect Group Director Ayhan Kose said, "If the past is any guide, there may be further growth downgrades in the store," implying that policymakers may need to be ready to employ additional measures to support activity. The World Bank Group, one of the largest sources of funding and knowledge for developing countries, is taking broad, fast action to help developing countries strengthen their pandemic response. By supporting public health interventions, working to ensure the flow of critical supplies and equipment, and helping the private sector continue to operate and sustain jobs. The Economic Times of India has already said that it is a mega recession. India needs a venture capitalist of the last resort. It further says that India must plan for a terrible year ahead in which the GDP falls by 5% or more. It also says that bankruptcies are inevitable. Friends, all these institutions give us a fair idea of the current economic crisis the world is going through. Friends, my intention of this video is to give a fair idea and create an awareness of the current global situation. It was great interacting with you all. In my next video, I will be talking on the second part, that is revival measure and to be adopted and positives out of this crisis. Thank you so much for giving me a patient hearing, and namaste to all.